The show Silo is set in a post-nuclear future. You've got thousands of people living in a giant missile silo that is hundreds of stories underground. Nobody knows where the silo came from. Nobody knows who built it. And it's not like all these people just got plopped there one day and they were like, wonder what happened here. They don't remember because it was erased from history. 140 years before them, there was a rebellion, complete revolt, where the rebels wanted to open the door. The attempt was thwarted. The rebellion was put down, and it's now celebrated in something called Freedom Day. But 140 years ago, the rebels took a piece of history because they burned old books, and they also destroyed a lot of files. So they literally know nothing. They don't even know what caused the war. So all of these people have no idea what happened before Freedom Day, 140 years ago. Ever since then, they've continued to work as a society inside. And the reason why the silo has continued to work is because of rules put in place, like you can't go outside. If you ask to go outside, you will go outside. But those that have done that in the past, they've died. Now, there are cameras set up so you can see what's going on outside, but it's bleak. The ground looks torn up, the trees are all dead, and they're able to actually see the bodies outside of those who asked to go. So for all intents and purposes, it seems like a pretty solid community. And they have everything. They've got a mayor, they've got mechanics, they have a sheriff named Sheriff Holston. And that's where we'll start off, with Sheriff Holston and his wife, Allison. Holston is the sheriff of the entire silo. Allison, his wife, works in tech. She works in the IT department, filing paperwork and fixing computers when tickets come in. But what these two desperately want is the chance to have a baby. Now, in the silo, because space is so limited, you have to be approved to have a baby. But they get approved, and it means they have 365 days to conceive a child. But after that, birth control goes back in. When they get approval, they get very excited. They quickly head to their doctor, and their doctor takes out the giant birth control that was placed inside Allison. Now, the clock is ticking. Now, the thing about getting approved for pregnancy is that everybody knows, so people start congratulating the couple. But there's one person that walks up, and she wants to help. Her name is Gloria, and she's kind of looked at as a kook. She offers to help in the fertility, and when she walks away, Allison asks her husband, what does she do? And he says she goes right to the edge of promising people a baby if they do what she says, which is fraud. Sheriff Holston doesn't think much of Gloria. Once the couple get back to their quarters, they start going at it, trying to make a baby. But afterwards, they have to head to work. Allison recently posted an article about how others can recover old files. She knows it's against the rules. She also knows, though, that it would cut down on her workload. She ends up getting reprimanded by her boss, Bernard, for this. Bernard walks away, and he looks like a guy with a stick up his ass. He ended up taking the article down. Fast forward a couple of months later, and they still don't have a baby. They're still going through their normal life, but it's frustrated the couple. But everybody in the silo is preparing for Freedom Day. The mayor is on edge. She always gets nervous around this day because it's a huge event. And if terrorism were going to happen, it would likely happen on that day. So she meets with Holston and his second-in-command, Deputy Marnes. She just wants to make sure they're prepared. And both the deputy and the sheriff convince her that everything is fine. And Freedom Day, like Freedom Days of the past, will go off without a hitch. But as the sheriff was talking to the mayor, Allison had just happened to run into Gloria. Gloria asked how the couple was doing in terms of conceiving a baby, and Allison admitted, not yet, but we're hopeful. Allison tries to get the hell out of there, but Gloria says, no, I just wanted to ask you a question, but I want to do so in private. So Allison and Gloria go back to her apartment. The first thing Gloria does is turn on the water, because as she tells Allison, I don't want Judicial to hear. And Judicial is like the silos version of the NSA, the CIA, FBI, all in a one. So just to cover her bases, she turned on the water to drown out any conversation they might have. She asked Allison, did you ever wonder what was on the servers that the rebels erased and the books they burned? If it was even the rebels who did it? Allison is starting to get uncomfortable because this conversation is illegal. But as she tries to go, Gloria stops her and says, one last thing. Do you actually think you're somebody they want having a baby? When Allison does get home that day, she does end up telling the sheriff about the conversation with Gloria, and the sheriff is pissed off about it. He wants to go arrest her, but Allison stops him and says, don't. Her and her husband couldn't have a baby, and she just wants you to look into the reason why. But as far as the sheriff's concerned, there is no reason. They just didn't conceive one in the 365-day period. That's it. The next day is Freedom Day. It's a big, big holiday, but Allison has to work. She figured that she would be on call because the sheriff was on call, and she ends up getting a ticket submitted. It's from a guy named George. He has a repair stall in the middle of the silo, and recently he's been submitting a lot of tickets. Everybody kind of dreads going there, and now it's Allison's turn. So when everybody's celebrating Freedom Day and listening to the mayor, she goes to visit George and see what's the problem. But there actually isn't one. This guy's been submitting tickets hoping that they sent Allison. They sent everybody else, but now he's finally got her. He brought her there because of what she wrote, that article about recovering old files. He knew that it wasn't a mistake. He also knew that it would be deleted soon, so he printed it out. He didn't ask for her because he didn't want to draw suspicion from Judicial. They have a law against owning relics. Basically, items before 140 years ago. They destroy all that stuff. And what he has, he doesn't know if it's a relic or not. So he didn't want to take the chance. But he wants her to look into it. He's got this old drive that was found by somebody about a year ago. He fired it up, it looked empty, but then he tried what she wrote, and there are files on it. The computer says most of the drives are in use, but he can't find any files. So he needs Allison's help. She sits down and starts going over some techniques, looking for these missing files, and after a few hours, she finally finds them. It's the silo's blueprints. It's really exciting to George, but it's pretty scary to Allison. She knows that if they're caught doing this, they're both going to be in big, big trouble. So she quickly leaves, letting Mark look over the stuff. It's all she can really think about. She certainly isn't focusing on having a baby, which is all the sheriff is thinking about. Although at this point, it's kind of becoming a chore. The next day, she calls out of work and heads to Gloria's and says, okay, why don't they want us to have children? And Gloria tells her it's because they don't want people that think independently to have children, raising independent children who might cause a revolution or a revolt. So they keep the birth control inside of them, making them think that they took it out. It's pretty crazy, but Allison has now tried to have a baby 3 different times, and she's been unsuccessful, so she's starting to believe it. The day after that, she also calls out of work, although this time she heads to go meet with George. She tells George, I want to see everything, and he opens up all of the files. The last file they look at is a video file of the outside, although it's like nothing they've ever seen before. The grass is green, the trees have bloomed, and you gotta remember that Allison has lived her entire life in the silo, looking at the same visual. So this is blowing her mind. When she gets out of there, she cannot concentrate at all. All she's thinking about was how they've been lied to their entire life. When the sheriff alerts her that they have a meeting with the doctor the next day because their 365 days is up, Allison says, yeah, that's cool, I'll meet you there. But when it comes time to actually show up for that meeting, Allison's nowhere to be found. The doctor, the sheriff, they wait for a little bit, but finally the sheriff goes looking for her. And he finds her in their house in a sort of subdued state. She sits him down and says, we need to talk. I knew that if I told you this, I would need proof, so I got it. She doesn't rat Gloria out, but she tells the sheriff Gloria's theory, that they were never going to let him have kids. The enforcers want docile people, not people like her. It's really hard for the sheriff to believe, but she says, well, I have proof. He didn't take out my birth control because I just did. And she's holding her birth control pill that was injected into her, and she's bleeding pretty badly. When the sheriff sees that, he rushes into action, running to go get the doctor, and he's stopped by Deputy Marnes, who lets him know that his wife is in the cafeteria causing quite a scene. After the sheriff left, Allison went to the cafeteria and started telling everybody that everything that they've known so far is a lie. That outside, it doesn't look like that bleak landscape. She's bleeding pretty badly, and she seems like she's going off the deep end, and the sheriff tries to calm her down, But then she says the 5 words that you are not supposed to utter. I want to go outside. And once someone says that, it's done. They get arrested and prepared to be sent outside. The sheriff knows what it means. And he also took an oath. So when he, the deputy, and the mayor all convene about the situation and they try to figure out a way where they can kind of save Allison, he says no. I mean, we'll look into it, but everybody heard her say, I want to go outside. And by looking into it, they question Gloria, and they also bring George in. George admits to seeing Allison, but also says she never came back. And when the judicial team searches his stall, they don't find anything. That's because George hid it really, really well. So unfortunately, there's nothing left to do. Right before Allison is supposed to be suited up and sent out, Sheriff Holston goes and has a conversation with her. She swears that she's not crazy, and that outside, it's beautiful. She uncovered all this stuff about the lying, but the biggest one is the fact that if she gets sent out there, she won't die. Judicial has the ability to change what they see on the screens, and they're using some kind of filter to do it. The sheriff still doesn't believe any of this, and she says, well, think about it. I mean, the people that were sent out there, the most recent ones, they swore that they wouldn't clean. But then they got out there, and what did they do? The first thing they did, they cleaned. And it's because they wanted us to see what they were seeing. So I'll tell you what, when I get out there, if I am wrong, if it is as bleak as it looks right now, then I will just walk away. But if I am right, if it is beautiful out, then I will clean. And you will know that I am telling the truth. They then have to get Allison suited up, and it's really emotional for the sheriff because he has to kind of read her rights. But then they send Allison out. And this is an event that the entire silo watches. They get really pumped to see whether or not the person sent out does clean. The sheriff, though, watches alone in his jail cell. Everybody else is really excited when Allison walks up to the camera and cleans it. But the sheriff, now he's thinking differently because he's remembering what it meant if his wife were to clean those cameras. He then watches as Allison tries to walk over the hill, but she stumbles, falls to the ground, and seemingly dies like everybody else before her. 2 years later, the sheriff is still the sheriff. Although the pain in his heart from watching Allison die hasn't gone away, especially considering every day he looks out, he sees her body. Since the loss of Allison, the sheriff has become pretty despondent. Deputy Marnes, though, comes to him one day and says, I got something you should see. George, the guy who Allison went to in the market, he's turned up dead. Looks like he fell off the stairs. People are thinking it's a suicide. But no one saw him go over, and there's an engineer all the way at the bottom that thinks it's murder. So Marnes and the sheriff go to investigate. They look over the body, and then they go to meet with the engineer who made the claim. Her name is Juliet Nichols, and this is the first time that the sheriff is meeting Juliet. And a short time after he meets Juliet, the sheriff does exactly what Allison did. He wrote a couple of goodbye notes to some people, he locked himself in the jail cell, and he told the deputy, I want to go outside. Now, the deputy noticed a change between the sheriff after he met Juliet, because the sheriff was dead inside until he met Juliet. So something changed. And he asked the sheriff, what was it? And the sheriff says, I finally started listening to what my wife wanted me to hear. So I'm going to go outside, and I'm going to find her. In episode 2, Marnes is wondering what exactly happened between Holston and Juliet. Because in his opinion, it seemed like after the two met, that's when Holston's whole mood changed. And it's partly true. Because shortly after Allison had showed George what was on that file, he got really excited. That was the breakthrough he was looking for. George, coincidentally, had been dating Juliet. Now, it wasn't a sanctioned relationship, so they had to kind of keep it hush-hush. But because they were dating, Juliet knew that George liked to dabble in artifacts and also was searching for something. Although he wouldn't explain what it was, and he just told her, when I find it, I'll know. Now, because they weren't sanctioned, they usually wouldn't hang out together publicly. But one day, all the engineers are having a party because Juliet is getting an apprentice. George showed up, and it was a surprise, but she let him know that everybody in the down deep, which is basically what they call the bottom of the silo, everybody down there knew, and nobody cared. He still didn't want to show too much affection. He just let her know that he got something big, and he didn't want to reveal what it was right then and there, so he said he would tell her later that night at her place. But when she got off work and she went to her place, George wasn't waiting for her. although he was there because there was a package waiting for her. When she opened it up, it was a very old Pez dispenser. Nothing inside, just a dispenser. And then there was a note that said, "Remember where you were the last time you saw this? I found what I was looking for." Juliet figured that she would just talk to George about it the next day. But when she woke up, she found out that George had committed suicide, falling over the balcony to his death, and it rocked her to her core. She knew that George didn't actually kill himself. He showed no signs, and plus, he clearly wanted to tell her what he found, so this made no sense at all. She went to the police officer in the Down Deep, a guy named Hank, and she told him that George did not kill himself. Hank knew that George and Juliet were seeing each other, and he kind of just figured that maybe Juliet was being a little bit reactionary to this because she was a little too close to it. And because of this, he tried to explain to her that there's got to be a thing as motive and reason, and she just didn't have any proof. And the bigger issue is, because they were in an unsanctioned relationship, she couldn't even really voice any concerns. But she got really frustrated, and finally, Hank agreed that he would send it up top to the sheriff, who he called an upstanding guy, and he would voice it as a fellow coworker voicing concern. The next day is when Holston and Martin showed up and met Juliet for the first time. They went to the scene of the crime, or the suicide, whichever way you look at it, and Juliet is definitely uncomfortable because she doesn't want to let on too much, but she tells both the police officers that George did not kill himself. It just made no sense. And they, just like Hank, tried to explain that it does look like suicide. And sometimes people just hide their emotion and their pain really, really well. But that's actually something that Juliet knows all too well, because both her little brother and her mother committed suicide, and she's the one who found the body. So she knows something about this kind of tragedy, and she was convinced that George didn't fit the criteria. Holston and Juliet then go to the coroner to check George's body for any signs of a fight, a skirmish, anything that could point to this actually being a murder. But they don't find anything. That includes any sign of a previous attempted suicide. So it's not like Holston completely dismissed Juliet's theory. Hank and Martins then walk into the room and let Holston know that judicial's on their way. They're going to want a briefing on everything that happened. Holston nods and then sends them off to go see if anybody was on the stairs or anybody knows anything about why George wanted to jump or anything that might have happened. He and Juliet then go to have a private conversation, just the two of them. He tells her that he's aware of the fact that the two are in a relationship. He's not going to tell on them, but he does wonder why the two never got sanctioned. She doesn't answer the question. She does, however, say that George left something for her. It is a relic, and it does mean he's going to have to confiscate it, but he promises not to tell Judicial where he found it. So before he does have that breakdown with Judicial, he goes to Juliet's apartment, and she shows him the Pez dispenser and then half of the note. She shows him the half that says, "Remember where you were the last time you saw this." She then takes Holston to where that was, and it's a part of the silo that he's never been before, and he doesn't even know exists. Deep in the Down Deep, there's a sign that says, "Do not proceed beyond this point. It is a punishable violation of the pact." But when you take that sign off, there's a tiny little hole in the wall. That leads to a tunnel that has graffiti written all over it, and Juliet's pretty sure it's pre-rebellion. But that's not what she wanted to show him. No, it's deeper in the silo. There's a hole in the floor that leads to a makeshift ladder, and when they climb down the ladder, Juliet flips some lights, and they are in a giant cave with a monstrous contraption below. Juliet figures it's what created the silo. The founders dug this deep hole, and instead of pulling the machine out, which would have been too difficult, they just threw 30 feet of concrete over it. Below the machine is just nothing but water. And she has no idea what is below that water, and she doesn't want to know what's below that water. George had seen drawings of a door, and he always was looking for it, but to Juliet's knowledge, she doesn't know if he ever found it. All of this is blowing Holston's mind, because he's lived his entire life in the silo, and none of what he's seeing has ever been discussed. And after all, he is the sheriff. Juliet then takes him lower to a little tiny platform that George kind of carved out as his own nook. He's got some shelves, a bed, some essentials, but she pulls out a box and tells Holston the last time that she saw the Pez dispenser was in that box. But all that's in there are just some old relics. One of the relics in the box, though, is something she's never seen before. It looks like an old camcorder, but they're not sure what it is or even how to work it. She then, however, notices that there was a wire that was tied to the spool, but the spool is empty. And then she starts following the wire, and it leads her to what George found. The drive that Allison had unlocked, and then directions on how to unlock it. At the time, though, neither Holston nor Juliet had any idea what they had in their hands. All they knew was that George did an awful lot to keep this hidden. After all, only he and Juliet even knew the place existed, to their knowledge, although Juliet guesses that maybe some higher-ups know about its existence. Either way, George took painstaking labor to make sure nobody would find it. One thing, though, catches Holston's eye. It's the fact that on the back of the printout on how to recover deleted files is his wife's handwriting. This sparks a little bit of an argument between Juliet and Holston. Holston admits that George and Juliet knew each other. And when he admits that, Juliet gets really angry. Because she starts thinking that the only reason that Holston came down there was because he wants to figure out if George had anything to do with Allison going out, cleaning. He completely deflects, telling her he's going to have to give Judicial all of this contraband. And she doesn't want him to do that. She wants Holston to go find George's murderer. It gets pretty uncomfortable between the two. Juliet at one point saying maybe if you listen to your wife, she wouldn't have gone out to clean. When cooler heads eventually do prevail, he promises Juliet that he will look into what happened to George, but in the meantime, she's going to have to be quiet, not draw any attention to herself whatsoever. He promised her that when he found something, he would send word. It would be a signal and she would know what it meant. So he went up to go have that meeting with Judicial, and weeks later, Juliet still hadn't heard anything until all of a sudden she heard that he was going out to clean. Just like with the cleaning 3 years ago, this is big news in the silo. Everybody gets around. Everybody's watching it. And in the Down Deep, Juliet is watching it amongst her peers, and they see Holston go out. They see Holston clean, and they see Holston try to make his way to Allison's body, which is still there. But then he does something completely shocking. He tries to take his helmet off, which they've never seen before. And that's because what they don't know and what they don't see is that when Holston got out there, it was just as Allison had predicted. It was green. He actually says to himself, oh my God, she was right. And while in the silo they could see Allison's body, outside, she wasn't there. There was no body. There was just green grass. After a little bit outside, Holston started having problems breathing, so that's why he took off his helmet. And as to whether or not he actually collapsed, we don't know. But as soon as he did collapse, Juliet got so pissed off, she just started screaming, he's a liar, and she stormed out. Juliet got so mad that she went to the only person she felt comfortable talking to, a woman named Martha. Martha fixed up old tech, old appliances, but she had kind of been a mother figure to Juliet ever since the age of 13. She knew that deep in that rough exterior, there was still a hurt little girl who found her brother and her mother dead, and Martha felt for her. Juliet tells Martha everything that happened with Holston, and she's infuriated because she waited and never heard anything, and now Holston's dead, and she might never know what happened to George. After talking to Martha, Juliet decided to do some investigating of her own. She went down to that little nook that George had carved out for himself, and even though she was terrified of water, she decided to grab some rope and go searching if she could find what George was talking about. Maybe she could locate a door. But right before she hits the water, she drops her flashlight, and she's pretty terrified. Now, way up, and I'm talking 100 floors up, in the silo, Marnes meets with the mayor. The mayor is completely stressed out, because without a sheriff, she's worried about order turning to chaos. She tells Marnes that she looked through all the old ledgers of the previous mayors, and there's not one instance of a sheriff being sent out to clean. And what really is concerning to her is she has no idea how the rebellion started. So for all she knows, the rebellion started because a sheriff was sent out to clean, and without a sheriff, chaos ensued. So it's of the utmost importance that they get a sheriff and get one right away. Now with Holston, he was named sheriff by the previous sheriff. That guy just retired and said Holston will be the sheriff, and it was done. She thought that Marnes would be perfect for the job, but he tells her, I'm retiring. It won't be me. So Judicial sends their candidates. They send 3 dummy candidates that are horrible with the actual candidate they want mixed in. It's a guy named Paul Billings. He was in the police force, but he left to go work for Judicial. So this is a way for Judicial to have a puppet as their sheriff. Marnes tells the mayor that he's not the worst candidate, but he's certainly not the best. And the mayor just says aloud how she wishes that Holston were to just name a successor. And that's when Marnes reluctantly tells her he did. He shows her a note that Holston left for him, and it names Juliet Nichols as the new sheriff. Marnes was reluctant to tell the mayor because naming an engineer the sheriff made no sense. And to Marnes, it was just more proof that Holston had kind of lost his way. But the mayor tells Marnes that she'll go and meet with Juliet. Maybe she'll be able to see what Holston saw in her. So the next day, they're planning on going to meet with their possible new sheriff, not realizing that she is as far down as you can get in the silo, hanging above a bunch of water. In episode 3, Juliet is able to crawl up the rope and she doesn't die, although she's pretty traumatized by almost falling into the water. She ends up passing out that night in a drunken stupor, awakened the next morning by one of her coworkers who can tell that something's going on with her, and she asks Juliet, come on, what is it? But Juliet doesn't reveal what's actually eating at her. Instead, she deflects. But she has a good reason for it. She feels shaking, and she knows that it's the generator that is causing that shake. Juliet's main priority as an engineer is to take care of that generator. The generator creates the electricity for the entire silo. If that thing goes down, they're all screwed. So she rushes downstairs to find out what exactly is going on, and she finds her apprentice messing with it. But he didn't have a choice because Juliet showed up for work late. Juliet's able to fix it, but she gets in trouble with her boss, Knox. He's actually in charge of the engineers, even though everybody kind of follows Juliet's lead. And this segues into an argument between the two because Juliet has been trying to tell Knox for a while now that they need to shut the generator down and actually fix it. They've been basically piecemealing this thing together with duct tape and elbow grease, but eventually, if they don't actually properly fix it, it's going to die on them. And then they really have an issue. And Knox is reluctant to shut the generator down because it's never been shut down before. He makes the point that an hour in darkness could cause utter chaos in the silo. They start screaming at each other, and eventually Knox says, we will have this discussion tomorrow when you're not hungover. Now, while Juliet is sobering up, the mayor and Marnes are making their way down the silo to meet with her, although she has no idea they're coming. This is going to be a long trip for the two, and it's going to take more than a day for them to get all the way to the down deep. The mayor and Marnes pass by Judicial, but they decide not to stop, which they know they'll probably hear about later. And they do hear about it when they make their first stop, which is at IT to talk to the head of IT, Bernard. Judge Meadows, the head of Judicial, found out that the mayor just walked on by, and she wasn't too thrilled about it. But that's because the mayor didn't want to hear about Paul Billings being sheriff, not when she's going to talk to Juliet about taking over the job. Once they get into Bernard's office, he tells both Marnes and the mayor that his numbers indicate Paul Billings is the best candidate for the job. The mayor then asks what his numbers say about Juliet Nichols, and he says, I don't need to look at the numbers. I know who she is. She's a thief. She stole 4 boxes of tape. It was reserved for IT, and it's not just any kind of tape. It's heat tape that we use to protect our servers from cooking. The mayor lets Bernard know that Juliet, who might or might not be a thief, was Holston's pick. And he can't believe that the mayor is truly considering her. But the mayor is. But this tape thing really is stuck up Bernard's ass, and he has a vendetta against Juliet, so he pushes Paul Billings on the mayor, but it's just not what the mayor wanted to hear. Her and Marnes head out of Bernard's office, and they continue down the silo, meeting and greeting people. A lot of these people haven't seen the mayor in years because they just live too far away from her. One of the things she likes doing is greeting people, but she also likes stopping by levels and seeing the newborns, which she does in this one particular level of the silo. It's not the babies that she really wants to see, it's the doctor. Because the doctor is Juliet's father. The mayor and Marnes are just doing simple vetting, but their questions are valid. Juliet was born in the mids, but she lives in the down deep, which is just kind of unusual. And Dr. Nichols tells both of them that he's kind of been estranged from Juliet for a while. After the tragedies that they suffered, he didn't stand in her way when she requested that she go to the down deep and become an engineer. She'd always shown interest in that sort of thing, so he didn't want to keep her from it. And because of his current job, he has trouble ever talking to her because he can't make it to the down deep and back in enough time to deal with his patients. The doctor is clearly uncomfortable talking about it. He makes up an excuse to get out of there, and it leaves the mayor with more questions than she has answers. But she continues on to the down deep. Marnes and the mayor continue to make their way down, but eventually they have to stop off for lunch. As they're enjoying conversation, the mayor gets a gift from Robert Sims, who is one of the heads of Judicial. It's nothing major, it's just a dessert, but the mayor doesn't appreciate it. She feels like it's a bribe. Even though she doesn't take too kindly to the gift, Sims continues pushing for Paul Billings as the mayor of the silo until eventually the mayor cuts him off and says, "I'll make my decision when I'm done with my trip." After lunch, the mayor and Marnes finally make their way down to the silo, but they make it at an unfortunate time for engineering because the generator is once again acting up. On top of it, Knox wasn't prepared for this. He didn't know they were coming, so it wasn't like they could prepare for an arrival. It's kind of an embarrassing situation for them. Knox tries to play it off like there's nothing to be worried about, but the mayor can tell that there's something clearly to be worried about. And that's when she sees down from the office a woman rush in and start feeling the generator. And she asks, "Is that Juliet?" And Knox says, "Yes, it is." Unaware of the fact she's being watched, Juliet is trying to listen to the generator to find out what is wrong with it. But it's the same problems they've been dealing with for the last few years. Juliet heads in the generator and does a temporary fix. With the mayor waiting for Juliet to finish the work, she decided to continue the vetting process by going and talking to her former friend, Martha. These two used to be super, super close, but it's been some time. You get the sense that there was a falling out between the two somewhere down the line. They make a little bit of small talk until eventually the mayor asks Martha, "Who is Juliet Nichols?" And Martha gives the mayor some kind of satisfactory answer because when the mayor does finally meet with Juliet, she offers her the job. The mayor explains that nobody wants Juliet for this job except Holston and herself, which comes as a surprise to Juliet. But Juliet turns it down. She tells the mayor that everybody thinks their job in the silo is the most important, but hers actually is. She keeps the generator running. And right now, the generator needs her. While the mayor doesn't agree with it, she does understand, and she walks over to Juliet and says, "Holston wanted you to have this." And she hands her his badge. The mayor and Marnes say their goodbyes and then start making their way up the silo. While they do that, the engineers start questioning Juliet on why in the world Holston would want her to be the mayor, and she tells them, "I have no idea." At one point, Hank asks her to see the badge, and she throws it to him. But that's when Hank notices that something is carved in the back of it, and that something says truth. Juliet remembers what Holston told her, that if he found something, he would send her a message that only she would understand. And she's pretty sure that truth is that message. So she runs up the steps trying to track down the mayor, and when she eventually does, she tells her, "I'll accept the job. But first, I need to fix the generator. And that's going to require shutting the generator down." Marnes and the mayor both have the same reservations about shutting the generator down that Knox did. but Juliet is able to convince them that if they don't shut the generator down and properly fix it, they're in for a very rude awakening one day. So the mayor agrees to shut the generator down and have the silo in complete darkness for 8 hours. That's going to let engineering go in and hopefully fix this thing for good. Right before they do this, the engineers all get together, they game plan on what they're going to do, and when the time comes, they jump into action. While the engineers are fixing the generators, the entire silo's in darkness, and the mayor can't sleep. She decides to go chat with Marnes, who, by the way, is crushing big time on the mayor. He is in the process of drawing a picture of her, which he hides. The mayor starts talking about life after being the mayor, retirement. And it turns out that Marnes' feelings are reciprocated because the mayor likes herself some Deputy Marnes, and the two end up kissing. It's hot. But as fireworks fly all the way up in the silo, in the down deep, things aren't going great. Juliet and the rest of the engineers are having trouble with the generator. They're going to be cutting it extremely close, but they end up getting the job done. When they turn on the generator, it sounds great, and the silo is once again illuminated. The next day, Juliet gets ready to take up her new position as sheriff. But before she does that, she has to stop off and apologize to Martha. The last time those two talked, Juliet had some pretty mean things to say, and she wanted to apologize. After she apologizes, she gives Martha the camcorder-looking device that she found amongst George's things. Juliet tells her that if she figures out what exactly it is, to let her know. She then says goodbye to her mentor and starts to make her way up the silo. But Juliet getting hired is still a hot-button issue for Bernard. The mayor and Marnes once again run into Bernard, this time on their way back up, where Bernard voices his displeasure at the mayor's decision. But Bernard's comments don't stop the mayor. Once she does reach her office, she makes it official, putting pen to paper and making Juliet Nichols the new mayor. She also wants to celebrate the new relationship she's having with Deputy Marnes, so she tells him, grab a drink, pour me a glass, I'm going to head to the bathroom. But she never gets to have that drink because she drops dead in the bathroom. Somebody clearly poisoned her. And Marnes tries to save her, but it's too late. In episode 4, we get to look back at Juliet's past. She had a great relationship with her family, her mom, her brother, and her dad. But once her brother and her mom died, her and her dad just couldn't see eye to eye. Eventually, a 13-year-old Juliet got sick of it. She headed down to mechanical because she liked fixing things, and that's where she met Martha. She forged a note from her dad saying that he was okay with her taking up residency in the Down Deep and becoming an apprentice with the hopes of doing something. Martha didn't know Juliet, but she did know her mom. And when Martha tried to send Juliet back up to the mids, Juliet pushed back. And Martha recognized that because Juliet's mom would have done the same thing. Martha then called in a teenager by the name of Knox and told him to take Juliet under his wing. The thing is, Martha knew that that note was doctored, so she did end up making a call to Juliet's father, and he arrived a day later. He asked Juliet if she was okay, and she says, yeah, I'm tired. They work me really hard down here, but it helps me forget about losing my mother and my brother. And because of that, the doctor let Juliet stay. Adult Juliet, though, is very far from being that little girl. No longer working in the Down Deep, she's excited to get her start as sheriff, although it gets jump-started pretty quickly when she arrives to find that the mayor has been murdered, and Marnes isn't doing so well. You've got Bernard and Sims also in the room trying to calm him down, but he wants vengeance against whoever did this. What really is breaking him up is the fact that he's convinced the poison was meant for him. Marnes tells both of them that whoever did this did it in the mids. They did it at the deputy station because they went for a walk and that would have been the time where their bottles would have been poisoned. He demands a list of people that they might have encountered from the mids who had a criminal record. The more Bernard and Sims talk to him, though, the more upset he gets. He also does not want to talk to Juliet. In fact, nobody in the room is a fan of the fact that Juliet is becoming sheriff. But Bernard, who is the mayor for the time being, is going to honor the last wish of Mayor Janes. Bernard, Juliet, and Sims decide to let Marnes blow some steam off, cool down a bit. So they let him be. This gives Juliet a chance to get acclimated to her new surroundings. Sandy, who used to be Holston's assistant, is tasked with showing Juliet around to her office and her new quarters, which used to be Holston's. It becomes apparent to Juliet pretty quickly that Sandy feels the same as pretty much everybody else, that she doesn't deserve to be sheriff, although Sandy doesn't do a good job hiding it at all. Anytime Juliet asks for something, Sandy's response is, "You'll get it when you're sworn in," even though Juliet being sworn in is just a formality at this point. The thing that Juliet really wants is George's file. Sandy gives her attitude about it, kind of complaining about how she's following orders, but she doesn't understand why Juliet's there, and Juliet cuts her off and explains, "I'm the sheriff, I'm your boss. So can we get over whatever this is and you go get me George's file?" And a very reluctant Sandy walks out. Once she does leave, Juliet starts looking around the office for any clue of what Holston might have found. Although after a bit, she comes up empty and she just decides to go to her new apartment. Once she does arrive, the first thing she notices is how hot it is in there. She turns on the air conditioner and she hears a rattling sound going on through the vent. She didn't think anything of it. In fact, it kind of calms her down a bit because she's so used to hearing things like that being from the down deep. So she doesn't try to fix it. She does find a card that welcomes her as a new occupant, but says, "Please send any unwanted items of the previous tenant to recycling for proper distribution." There's nothing really that fits that description left in the apartment, so for Juliet, that card really doesn't mean much. There's then a knock at the door, and it's Bernard, with a deputy holding her new uniform as sheriff. She's also going to be sworn in as the new sheriff. Juliet says aloud how this is kind of ironic, Bernard being the one to do this because he is, after all, the one that accused her of stealing. And he once again asks her, "Well, did you steal?" And she says, "No, I appropriated it because we needed it." Bernard then tells her that she was not his choice for the position. But considering the recent events, he figures it's best to just let bygones be bygones. And they both agree to let that just be in the past, forge a new working relationship together. Now, officially being sworn in, she has access to all those things that she didn't before, so she continues to start looking around for a clue that she's not finding. And her day gets worse when Sandy lets her know that Judicial doesn't have a file for George. She does, however, have a file from Holston that was left behind. And once Juliet looks in it, there's a lot of pieces of paper, but one sticks out. It says, "Double the flowers in front of the mirror." Juliet doesn't even get a chance to really think about it because Sandy comes in and says, "Are you not hearing the radio? You need to go. Marnes is getting in a fight right now." Once Juliet goes to see what's going on with Marnes, he's got some poor soul jacked up against a wall as he starts beating on him, demanding to know answers as to why he poisoned the mayor. And this guy didn't poison the mayor. Juliet is able to cool down the situation, and she goes and takes Marnes for a drink, like coffee, because alcohol is the last thing this guy needs. It's becoming a trend, but he tells her the same thing that everyone's told her, that Juliet was not his choice for this job. And she feels like it's a good time to explain why she took the job. She tells Marnes all about this hidden clue from Holston that was left behind. And then she makes Marnes a proposition. "You help me find out who killed George, and I'll help you find out who killed the mayor." And Marnes is in. Marnes was able to get that list of guys who had a criminal record that they might have encountered. Up until this point, his whole vigilante justice wasn't going so hot. But the next name on his list was someone named Patrick. He and Marnes clearly have a past, and they also clearly do not like each other. But Marnes didn't come to talk to Patrick. He came to talk to Patrick's wife. Patrick finds that a little funny because his wife died a year ago, and he blames Marnes for it. Marnes makes a snide remark about how Patrick's wife died the moment she met Patrick, and Patrick goes off and clocks Marnes right in the face. Juliet, once again, has to cool that situation down, and she takes Marnes back to his apartment. She asks, "What's up with this Patrick guy?" And Marnes explains that Patrick Kennedy had previous issues with extortion and also robbery. There was also a jam with Judicial over relics. To Juliet, it seems like Marnes just kind of has a vendetta against this guy, so she's going to let him handle that. But she decides to ask him if he ever noticed a hard drive in Holston's safe or apartment or anything. And Marnes tells her, check recycling. Any personal effects of Holston's would have ended up there. And up until this point, Juliet hadn't even considered that they probably already cleaned his apartment out. So if that hard drive were there, yeah, it probably would be in recycling. She's going to look into it, but then they start talking about the whole situation with the mayor. She understands why Marnes is convinced that he was the target for the assassination, but she thinks there is a possibility that the target actually was the mayor. I mean, after all, she is the mayor. And Marnes just doesn't buy that. The mayor was well-liked by basically everybody. To him, he can't figure out who in the world would want to kill her. That's when Juliet notices that Marnes has a picture that he drew of the mayor hanging on his wall. And she knows that this was way more personal than she even realized. She decides to let Marnes be, but asks him, should we put a deputy outside if you are so convinced that someone's out to kill you? And he says, no, don't worry about that. I got a shotgun. I'm good. Once Juliet leaves, Marnes decides to start drinking and taking out his frustrations on a heavy bag. He does, though, get a visitor. It's Sims. Sims is pretty surprised to see the state of Marnes, like his face being banged up. Marnes tells Sims how it was Patrick Kennedy. He went to go visit his wife because his wife had threatened Marnes a few times, and she definitely meant it, but he found out that his wife had died. And this doesn't really come as a surprise to Sims because Marnes kind of has that personality that invites you to punch him in the face. Sims, however, did not come to just chat with Marnes and make sure he's doing okay. He brought good news. He tells Marnes that Judge Meadows is ready to make Juliet a former sheriff and put Paul Billings in the position. All they need is Marnes and Mayor Bernard to sign off on it. If only Sims were to come to him about 2 hours ago, he would have been all for this. But after him and Juliet had come to an understanding about their relationship, Marnes isn't about to oust her from the position. He, though, doesn't tell Sims this. He says, yeah, I'm not ready to do that. She knows that she's not wanted, so let's let her screw up, and then she'll end up back in the down deep before you know it. While those two were chatting, Juliet had made her way down to recycling. She asked the woman if she came across a metal box that might have had a bunch of paper with some writing in it, and the woman tells her no. That kind of description, she would have remembered something like that. So Juliet, a little frustrated, just says, well, if you come across it, let me know directly. Juliet then made her way back to her apartment, but she had to go through the cafeteria to get there. She runs into a guy, though, in the cafeteria. His name's Lucas, and she's noticed him before, but it's odd. He's sitting by himself, and he's just staring out into the abyss. They have a very awkward interaction. Lucas trying to be friendly and nice, and Juliet just being extremely uncomfortable. Once Juliet is able to get out of that conversation, she continues to make her way to her apartment, and she gets a radio from Martha. Martha tells her that she's come across something that requires her insight. Martha is intentionally trying to be kind of covert, because after all, anyone could be listening to this broadcast. And Juliet, picking up on that, just tells her she'll find some time to get down there and find out what she's talking about. Martha then asks Juliet how are things going, and Juliet tells her, well, she actually thinks she's found an ally. But Juliet doesn't know that that ally, Marnes, he's getting tuned up that night. He is plastered. And it ends up being the last night he gets tuned up. Because that night, Marnes is attacked in his apartment. And while he puts up a good fight, the guy ends up getting the shotgun away from Marnes and ultimately killing him. Juliet, though, is unaware of this murder. She went back to her apartment, and the first thing that greeted her was the sound from the vent. And then she thought it was kind of weird. She decided to investigate it, and it turned out that that was a hint from Holston. He had left it there. It was a metal washer attached to a string, and when she pulled the string, there was George's file. In episode 5, Juliet looks over the dossier of George's death, and What she finds is the fact that George kept his mouth shut. He said that he acted alone, and he gave Judicial no information whatsoever about what he may have wanted to hide. There's a knock at the door, and Juliet goes to answer, and it's a telegram telling her to come immediately because Marnes is dead. When she does eventually arrive at Marnes' apartment, she's greeted by Sims, Bernard, and then Paul Billings, the guy that Judicial really wanted in her place. Paul, though, isn't confrontational at all. It seems like he just wants to be a good cop. The first introduction that Juliet has to Paul Billings is Sims telling her that Paul is now her new deputy. Bernard's big concern with all of this is keeping a lid on it. He doesn't want word getting out that there was a murder. It's going to be tough to do, but Sims will try his best. Bernard asks everybody to come to his office while a cleaning crew comes in and takes the body out, and Juliet asks for 1 minute alone. She starts surveying the apartment, and she notices something. It's the fact that the hand-drawn picture that Marnes did of the mayor is gone. She finds that kind of interesting. She then looks on his person, and she's able to find the list of suspects that he had collected. He hadn't finished that list yet. The first one circled is Patrick Kennedy. She keeps all of this information to herself, and then she heads to Bernard's office, where she meets once again up with Sims and Paul Billings. Bernard is really new to the job. He's not quite sure how to handle this. You had the mayor murdered, and now you had Marnes murdered. Sims starts coming up with an idea, but Juliet cuts him off and says, we should bury them together. Bernard actually likes the idea. He thinks that they could play this to their advantage, saying that Marnes and the mayor were in love. Doing a double funeral for a couple that wasn't married is unheard of, but Bernard wants to do it because then that becomes the story, not the fact that they were murdered or even how they died. There's a little pushback from Paul pointing out that if they were in a relationship, it's unsanctioned, and Bernard thinks that that could actually work to their favor because these two were so old, no one's really going to care, and also, if they do, it's even better for them because that's all people are talking about, an unsanctioned relationship. Sims states that if what Bernard is looking for is a distraction, then what they should do is something called a forgiveness holiday. It boosts morale. It's good for the silo. Bernard, however, shoots back that a forgiveness holiday is simply good for Judicial. No, what he's planning on doing is pushing the story that the two were in love, and then he's going to offer a race to the top. The winner of this will get something called the Johns Trophy. Bernard's not a big fan of races, but it is an excuse for people to drink beer and yell, and that is good for what they need right now. Sims isn't a real big fan of any of this, so he heads off to leave, but before he does, he turns to Juliet and says, I stopped by Marnes' apartment last night because I told him that we should make Billings sheriff now, and he disagreed, but not because he thought you would succeed, it's because he thought you would fail. He continues being pretty nasty until finally Bernard cuts him off and says, all right, man, it's enough. Once Sims finally does leave and Billings is out of the way, Bernard gives Juliet some advice. The pact, the massive document on all the rules in the silo, it implies that a sheriff basically has to kiss Judicial's ass. Translation, buddy up with Sims, or it's going to be a rough career for you. Not too long after, everybody has the funeral and it's well attended. A couple of speeches are made, and it works because no one's questioning why Marnes or the mayor were killed. When Juliet returns to her office from the funeral, she's greeted by an old friend from the Down Deep, Deputy Hank. He got invited to the funeral, but he decided not to go. He's more interested in what she told Martha on the walkie-talkie that she might have found somebody to look into the George thing for her. And Juliet has to tell Hank, yeah, we just buried him. Hank knows that this job could be pretty difficult for Juliet, so he reminds her, if you need anything, just let me know. Juliet heads into her office. She starts reading the pact, but she gets interrupted by Sandy. Sandy comes in guns blazing, telling her that she knows the only reason she took this job was to find out who killed George Wilkins. She's worried that that might cloud Juliet from the real goal now, finding out who killed Marnes. So she tells Juliet, if you want my help, you will find out who killed Marnes, because everything in this office goes through me. And Juliet reminds Sandy, yeah, I'm finding out who killed your buddy. That's my job. Sandy says, no, I'm talking about you finding out who really did it, not who Judicial can find as a patsy. Juliet asks, why would Judicial serve up a patsy? And Sandy tells her, that's because Judge Meadows doesn't give a shit about the truth. The only thing she cares about is maintaining order. And when a mayor and a deputy get murdered, things could get out of order. Juliet jumps right into action, going and trying to figure out who killed Marnes. She is tasked with bringing Billings along, even though that's the last thing she wants. She doesn't want to babysit this guy, and she doesn't trust him, but he knows the pact. Means he knows the rules, what she can and cannot do. They start going through the list, and Juliet decides to send Paul home for lunch, because she'd just rather do this thing herself. Billings can tell that he's not wanted, so he does end up leaving, agreeing that they would reconvene back in the office later that day. The first place Juliet heads is Patrick Kennedy's apartment, the one that's listed on the sheet. He's not there, so she decides to break in. They're doing a little bit of snooping. Not only does she find rat poison, she finds the picture of the mayor that Marnes drew. Looks like this is pretty clear cut. But as she's leaving, she gets caught by one of the other residents who asks her, "What the hell are you doing?" She tells him that she's looking for Patrick Kennedy, and he just says, "He's not here." And that's because Patrick Kennedy doesn't live there anymore. After his wife died, they moved him to a single apartment. So the fact that all this evidence is in the wrong apartment is red flag number 1. Now that she knows that, Juliet went and found Patrick Kennedy to get him to safety. She doesn't tell him, though, why she's doing any of this. Now, while Juliet was doing all of this, Paul Billings didn't go back to his apartment for lunch. He went to go to Judicial. He goes to Mims's office, but Mims already had a guest. It's a guy named Doug Trumbull. And Doug Trumbull is the one who killed Marnes. Although Paul Billings doesn't know that. He does know who Doug Trumbull is. He knows that he's trouble, and he can't believe that Billings is considering this guy as a candidate for Judicial. Once Billings actually sits down and talks to Mims, he gets the Patsy's name. Although Billings doesn't know he's a Patsy. And he rushes back to the office where he finds Juliet, and he's excited to tell her that he did head to Judicial. Not to rat her out, he just wanted to see how the investigation was going. Juliet's a little surprised that Judicial even has their own investigation, and Billings tells her that they get reports from people who don't officially exist. Judicial's reports have better intel than what the Sheriff's Department knows, and everything the Sheriff's Department gets is secondhand after Judicial sees it. Judicial got reports from these people that don't exist. They call them Friends of the Silo, and what Judicial was hearing was that someone named Ralph Melby was the one who killed Marnes. Juliet, upon hearing this, rushes out and tells Sandy, "Hey, get me an arrest warrant for Patrick Kennedy." And Billings tries to tell her, "No, I said Ralph Melby." But Juliet she didn't even hear him and says, "Kennedy first." She walks away from Billings and Sandy follows her out because Sandy wants to know what's the update. And Juliet tells her that she knows that Ralph Melby is a patsy, but also he's the wrong patsy. Judicial is hoping that Juliet would arrest Ralph Melby. It would make her look incompetent when they actually frame Patrick Kennedy, their actual patsy. This would get Juliet fired, this would get Billings the job, and Juliet would be back in mechanical. So in order to stop this from happening, she needs to rush over to Patrick Kennedy's apartment before they clear it or get the proof that they're looking for. When Juliet does end up getting to Patrick Kennedy's old apartment, sure enough, there's Doug knocking on the door demanding that somebody answer. And Juliet tells him, yeah, it took housing a while to find out that his wife died a year ago and Patrick was moved to a single. It's probably why Judicial still has this apartment listed as his residence, which means you planted evidence in the wrong apartment. And Doug takes off running. Nobody really seems to notice because that race to the top is going on. And while the race is going up, Doug rushes down the silo. They do end up knocking into the runners at one point, and Doug is able to knock Juliet over the balcony as he tries to free up her hands so she just falls and dies. Luckily for Juliet, a couple of spectators notice what is going on. They rush to her aid, but it allows Doug to get away. Juliet, however, is saved. When Juliet gives the description of the guy to Paul Billings, he knows right away that it's Doug. He tells Juliet that he'll get judicial security to get an arrest warrant right away. They're not going to get the opportunity to arrest Doug, though. Doug decided to go ahead and meet with Sims after screwing up. Sims gives him a whole backstory on his life growing up. His dad was a janitor, and Sims always was embarrassed by it, but then he realized that the janitor was actually the most powerful person in the silo. One day, Sims' dad told him that he wanted to show him something. He took him to a door that said janitor. He told Sims that he would have to make a decision right then and there. He could shadow his dad, become an apprentice, but he could never tell anybody what was on the other side of that door. Or he could forge his own path. He decided to forge his own path. He gives Doug the opportunity to do the same thing by welcoming into Judicial and asking him if he wants to officially be a shadow. And Doug is excited and says yes. Sims then asks him if he's willing to do what it takes for the good of the silo. And Doug once again says yes. And that's when Sims throws him over the edge. To Judicial, to Sheriff Nichols, it looks like a suicide. She has to give her debriefing to Judge Meadows, and she breaks down that Doug was trying to frame Patrick Kennedy for the murders. Knowing his arrest was inevitable, he decided to kill himself. Meadows is kind of dismissive of everything that Juliet has to say. She acts like Juliet is crazy for having this theory because she worked with Doug Trumbull for 7 years in Judicial. She never saw any signs of it, and Sims backs her up on this. They don't know why he would do such a thing. Juliet tells Judge Meadows that they'll look into the why, but the judge tells her, don't spend any more time on this. We have the killer, and he's dead. She heads back to her office where Sandy is waiting for her because Sandy is getting moved. It's pretty confusing to Juliet because Sandy came in just a few days ago demanding that Juliet help her if Juliet wants any of Sandy's help. And Sandy admits that she didn't think Juliet would actually find the killer. But the fact is, she's sick of everything up top. She wants to get lower so she doesn't have to deal with the bureaucracy. Later in the day, Juliet goes and meets with Bernard. Bernard admits to Juliet that while he doesn't want to do it, he's got to admit Sims may have been right. What the silo really needs is a forgiveness holiday. People get a little wild when they have one of these, so he's going to need Juliet and all the deputies just on alert. He then tells her that he was wrong about her. He didn't quite see what Holston saw in her, but now he does. He's willing to help her in anything she might need. And at the moment, the only thing she needs is 2 days off. She wants to go to the Down Deep, visit her friends. As she's leaving Bernard's office, she once again sees Lucas sitting by himself in the cafeteria just staring off in the stars. And curiosity gets the best of her, and she asks, "What are you doing?" He tells her that when it's really clear at night, these lights show up in the sky. He has no idea what they are, but he's been watching them long enough to see that they have patterns. These patterns repeat like they're in a big circle. She starts looking, and sure enough, there are things that she's never noticed. Lucas just says, "I'll just add it to the list of things we don't know about." And yeah, they don't know about stars, but it is weird. The next day, Juliet heads down to the Down Deep, and a little while later, she shows up and she heads straight to Martha's. She's worried about Juliet. I mean, after all, she was dangling from the staircase, and everybody saw it. And she asks Juliet, what the hell is going on? But Juliet simply says, "I can't tell you." Juliet then gives Martha an update on the hidden file with George, and the fact that nothing in it was stuff that Juliet didn't already know. She then asks Martha if she made any headway with the camcorder that she left her. And Martha says, "Actually, yeah, I did." There's a little sticker on it with writing, and when you use a magnifying glass, you still can't see what it says. But that magnifying glass that Juliet is using is the most powerful magnifying glass that Judicial will allow, which begs the question, why would Judicial destroy magnifying glasses that magnify things bigger? Martha says, "For me, there are two big mysteries about the pact. One is the fact that they stipulate we can't mechanize the way we go up and down the silo. The second is no magnification beyond a certain power. So a relic like this is going to get you more than a slap on the wrist. Something with wiring this small, the effect is going to be a lot more dramatic." Martha's really concerned for Juliet's safety. All these people dying. She's worried that if Juliet continues to look into this, she will end up dead. So she begs her to give up the badge, but Juliet tells her, "I need to find out what happened. I need to open up an investigation that allows me to look into what happened to George. All I have to do is use the right bait." She then goes and gets it. It's the Pez dispenser. In episode 6, Juliet used that bait. She planted the Pez dispenser in Doug's apartment so that when her, Paul, and a couple other deputies went to search his apartment, they would find it. She allowed Paul to find it. That would hopefully open up an investigation that she could dig into and look into why George was murdered. The next day, though, when Paul shows up for work, he's surprised because Juliet still has the Pez dispenser in her property, and she's supposed to take it to Judicial. In fact, it's against the pact that she's kept it this long. They start arguing about the pact because Juliet has done some research. She's actually been reading up on it. What the pact says is she's allowed to keep the relic if it's involved in a serious crime. And she feels like murder is a serious crime. The relic being found there is interesting. But Paul points out that yes, the sheriff can keep the relic, as long as Judicial signs off on it. That means later that day, Paul and Rebecca head to Judicial. They meet with both Sims and the judge. Juliet shows both of them what they located in Doug's apartment, and that comes as a big surprise to Sims. Sims is definitely suspicious, but Juliet asks the judge's permission to look into it, because nobody in the room knows exactly what this relic is. They just know that it is a relic. Before the judge can even answer, Sims starts arguing with Juliet about the fact that this relic did not belong to Doug. He knows this because Judicial has all the relics cataloged in a database that is way more advanced than the one that the sheriff would have knowledge of. Sims does point out that what Judicial does know is the watch that Juliet is wearing once belonged to George Wilkins, the guy that she claims is murdered. She doesn't deny it, but it does leave Sims pretty suspicious. And even though he's suspicious, he still thinks that an investigation into the relic would be a smart play, especially considering they're having a forgiveness day. It could open up more relics being turned in. Once Juliet and Paul leave, Juliet tries to get rid of Paul, telling him, yeah, kick rocks, I'll see you in an hour. But Paul says, that's not going to happen. Now that Sims has given you permission to do this, he's going to have eyes on you at all times. He's trying to pin you on something. So, like it or not, I'm with you today. Reluctantly, Juliet agrees, and the first place they head to is Patrick's. She asks Patrick if he knows who deals with relics, and he claims dumb. He's reluctant to tell her anything, especially considering Paul is with her, and he doesn't know Paul. Eventually, though, he does give up a name. Her name is Regina Jackson, and when Juliet and Paul get there, she's not the most welcoming, especially considering it has to do with George. She recognizes the watch on Juliet's arm, and she tells Juliet, I used to be his girlfriend. And that stops Juliet right in her tracks, because she thought that George was hers, and hers alone. And now she's finding out that George was double-dipping a little bit. And from the way that Regina tells it, Regina wasn't a big fan of George, because she feels like George used her to get what he wanted, i.e. relics, and then he moved on to the next thing, i.e. Juliet. Regina tells both of them that she's not a relics dealer. George just had her buy things for him. Other than that, after George went down to mechanicals, she never heard from him again, so she can't really help out. Right before they leave, Juliet asks Regina, do you have any questions for us? And Regina says, yeah. When he told you that he loved you, did you believe him? And Juliet doesn't even dignify it with a response. She just walks out, but you can tell she's troubled. Now, while those two were investigating, Sims was doing an investigation of his own. He went to those judicial archives, and he looked into the Pez dispenser, and sure enough, it's in there. It's even registered to a George Wilkins, which Sims finds really interesting. The fact that Juliet is wearing a watch that they know was George's. The fact that they know that Juliet claimed George was murdered, and the fact that now Doug just so happened to have an item that was also known to be from George. It's all too much of a coincidence for Sims. So Sims, along with Bernard, head down to visit Juliet in her office. And Juliet's taken completely off guard when Sims tells her that Judicial knows that the relic belonged to George. But when they searched George's apartment, they didn't find it. Now, mysteriously, it turns up in Doug's apartment. And they know it never belonged to Doug. So for Judicial, it's all too much of a coincidence that Juliet is wearing the watch of a dead guy she claims was murdered, and now the dead guy's relic turns up in Doug's apartment. Juliet, thinking on her feet, points out that it was actually Paul who found the relic in the first place, not her. And Paul doesn't say a word, although he knows that he was being used. Juliet, though, does get a lifeline when Bernard asks Sims, hey, is it possible that Doug was one of the people that searched George's apartment? If he was, then it's very possible he saw the relic, he thought it was cool, and he just kept it, never turning it in. Sims doesn't believe it, but he also can't argue with it. Bernard then asks Juliet if, in her search, they found any reason of why Trumbull would want to kill Marnes and the mayor. But Juliet says, no, not yet. Bernard is cool, though, if this remains unsolved. When Bernard and Sims eventually leave, Paul confronts Juliet about why she would plant the item in Doug's apartment and then put him in a situation where he's the one to find it. He's really pissed off about this because her actions could have gotten him jailed or, even worse, sent out to clean. And he's got a family. He's got a daughter. He screams at her that she has to start being honest with him. Not just as if her life depended on it, but his as well. Juliet's kind of dismissive of it and tries to walk away, but Paul keeps harping on it until finally Juliet says, okay, if you want to be honest, your hand shakes. You've been hiding it. You have the syndrome and you haven't reported that. And isn't that a part of the pact? And according to the pact, because you have the syndrome, you are completely unqualified to have this job. You shouldn't be anywhere near a firearm. Paul doesn't deny it. He just wants honesty from Juliet. And she doesn't seem willing to give it. So finally, he just goes home. Juliet heads home a little while later, and as she's going to her apartment, she once again sees Lucas in the cafeteria by himself. The stars aren't out, so she's a little curious as to why Lucas is even there, and he says it's because he was waiting to see her. There's heavy flirtation going on. When Juliet eventually gets to her apartment, she can't sleep. The thought about George cheating on her is just too much. She needs some advice, and she radios Martha. She's ready to give up. She's ready to give up the badge, because the whole reason she showed up and took the job was to find out who killed George. But George turned out to be a lying cheat. And she doesn't care anymore who killed him. She just feels betrayed. Martha, though, convinces her to stick with it. She gives her a little bit of a pep talk, reminding her that it speaks volumes if Juliet were to give up all because she found out some unsettling news about George. After this little pep talk, Juliet is remotivated and she decides to go visit Regina again, this time without Paul. She confronts Regina saying, "You're the rat who gave up George to Judicial. You told them about the hard drive. It's because of you that George is dead. You talked to them." And Regina says, No, it's not Judicial I talked to. No, Judicial comes during the day. They ask the easy questions. But the man who knows everything, he comes at night. He was standing at the foot of my bed. He repeated every single person I talked to that day. This shocks Juliet, but before she can ask any questions, Regina starts putting on a fan to drown out any noise that were to take place because she tells Juliet they can hear us. Once there is noise drowning out their conversation, Juliet asks her, "Who are you talking about?" But Regina never answers, just telling Juliet that every name that Regina gave this person was another day her mom didn't have to spend in the mines. So yeah, she gave up quite a few names. Juliet asks Regina what was on the hard drive, but Regina tells her, "I have no idea. I never saw it." She traded George the hard drive for something that she's kept, and it's incredible. She walks over to her rug, and it was hidden inside. It's a book. The book's been passed down for generations in George's family. And when Regina hands it over, she tells Juliet, "This will get you killed." When Juliet gets back to her apartment and looks at it, she realizes why. The book is a Georgia travel guide from pre-rebellion. It's a kid's book with a bunch of pictures. Visuals that shock Juliet because it's colors and shapes and trees and rivers, stuff she has never seen. Stuff that's so shocking, she's having trouble processing it. But what Juliet doesn't know is that Judicial is watching her read this book. Because Judicial has a hidden camera in Juliet's apartment. And the two agents that are watching this decide that they have to wake up Sims. He has to see this. In episode 7, as Juliet looks through the book, right in the front of it, there's a bunch of names written down, and one of them catches her eye. It's the name Gloria. She recognized the name, and when she goes over to the files that she found, sure enough, there is a Gloria. She's never met Gloria, but it is interesting that she's here in the files, and she was interviewed by Judicial. She decides to pack up all the files, including the book, keep it on her, and head out, which is a smart move, because at this point, Sims has gotten to Judicial headquarters, and he's watching her. He doesn't want to act, though. He wants to just keep following her, see where she leads them. When Juliet gets to her office, she looks up Gloria, only to find that Gloria is now in long-term care over in medical. A short time after finding this out, Paul shows up. He starts giving Juliet all the messages that she missed, and one of them is from maintenance, apologizing because they broke her vase when they showed up. And Juliet can't figure out what maintenance was doing. She didn't request anything, so why were they in her apartment in the first place?
She questions Paul on it, but Paul says, I don't know how they do things in the down deep, but up here, you learn pretty quickly not to question what maintenance does or else your toilet doesn't work. And down in the down deep, they're just fix it themselves, so they question everything. The next message she has is from the mayor telling her that he wants to meet with her first thing in the morning, but she brushes it off, telling Paul that she has to do something in the mids and she'll have to reschedule. When she does head out, she turns her radio off. The thing she has to do is go meet with Gloria. Gloria isn't supposed to have any visitors, but Juliet's badge gets her in the door, and Juliet finds out why Gloria isn't supposed to have any visitors. It's because Gloria has been drugged up for the past 3 years. She's completely unresponsive. She doesn't even know what's going on around her. In her mind, she's on the beach with family. In reality, she's useless. Juliet recognizes this pretty quickly, so she leaves. She knows that if she actually does want to talk to Gloria and find out information, she can't have her in this kind of state. But in order to get her out of that state, she needs clearance from the judge. So she heads to Judge Meadows' office only to find out that Judge Meadows is out that day. She's sick. When Juliet eventually arrives back in her office, it's chaos. Because there was a fight that broke out near one of the bars. It was an absolute shit show, and Juliet was nowhere to be found, even though they were radioing her. It was up to Paul to kind of manage things, and they didn't have a lot on staff. So when Juliet shows up and sees what's going on, Paul grabs her and takes her into her office and starts yelling at her. He's pissed because he knows that the people need a sheriff, and right now they're not getting one. On top of it, he was forced to lie for her when the mayor asked why she didn't show for their meeting. He's completely fed up and demands some answers. So Juliet tells him that George Wilkins was murdered, just like Marnes, the mayor, and even Doug. She then gets a little emotional while looking at Paul and says, the truth is, I don't know what I'm doing. I came up here to find out who killed George. And the only thing I've learned so far is the fact that the guy I loved used me. But yet, for some reason, I still want to find out what happened to him. I know it's all connected to the other murders and why Holston went out and why his wife went out. So what I need from you is to look the other way as I look into 4 murders and 2 cleanings. Wanting to help, Paul tells her that because they found one of George's relics in Doug's apartment, and that led to opening up a case, it could also lead to reopening George's case. Right before he leaves the office, Juliet asks him, do you know where Meadows lives? And he gives her the address. She's planning on visiting with Meadows the next day. But that night, she decides to pay a visit to her new friend, Lucas. She's actually the first one there. She beats him to watching the stars. And they get to chatting about what Lucas does. He actually works in IT. He knows Bernard, kind of. They then start talking about the stars in the sky and what it all could mean. And Lucas takes that as a sign that he should lean in to kiss Juliet. It's not a good sign because she pulls back, it makes things awkward, and she leaves, and Lucas feels weird. But one of the reasons she is more involved in looking at astrology now is because in that book that she was given, there's a whole section on it about what the stars mean, different constellations. So now at least she kind of has something to go on. The next day, before she goes and visits the judge, she has to go and meet with the mayor. He wanted to meet with her because there's been a threat against him. Not really against his life, per se, but you could read it like that. Bernard tells Juliet that after he intervened on Juliet's behalf in the meeting with Sims and Meadows, Meadows didn't like it. So Meadows told Sims that if Bernard were to obstruct in her actions, then she would use some kind of contortion of the pact to remove him. What he's worried about is Meadows possibly hijacking the servers. Coming from IT, Bernard knows what someone could do if they in fact did that, how much power they would have. So what he wants is to find something, along with Juliet's help, to wall the mayor in so she doesn't step outside of her lane. Juliet jumps right into action. After this meeting, she goes and visits with Meadows, and she finds that Meadows is in fact sick and in no mood for visitors, but Juliet doesn't give her an option. She demands to know why Gloria is in this quasi-vegetative state. And at first, the judge doesn't even recognize her name. But when she gets a description of Gloria, she goes, oh, yeah, her. It's for her own good. Juliet accuses Meadows of drugging Gloria because She feels like Gloria told Allison Becker something that made her want to go outside. The judge can't figure out exactly why Juliet would even want to talk to Gloria, and truthfully doesn't really care. She even goes so far as to say, "Juliet, I'm not stopping you from talking to Gloria." And that's when Juliet points out, "You're not, but you're prohibiting me from talking to her with a sound mind." Juliet wants answers so badly that she offers Meadows a deal. "If you let me talk to Gloria, not drugged up, then by the end of the week I'll turn in my badge." Meadows looks at Juliet and tells her, "I can't lift the order, and there isn't anything that I can do about it. You need to stop doing whatever you're doing." Juliet shoots back, "I'm not stopping until I find out what I want to know." And Meadows says, "They'll never let you." That really perks up Juliet's ears a bit. She starts questioning Meadows on who is they, but Meadows refuses to answer, telling her just to get out. It's at that moment that Juliet realizes Meadows isn't in power. She's nothing more than a puppet. And that puppet was being watched by possibly the puppet master, because Sims also had a hidden camera in Meadows' apartment, so he saw the whole conversation. When Sims heard that Juliet had visited Gloria in medical, he wanted to see the replayed footage. The problem is, there's a vase full of flowers blocking the camera, so Sims can't see what they're talking about. As Sims tries to dig into what Juliet is onto, Juliet was trying to get help with this whole Gloria situation, and the only person she could think of was her dad. She explains to her dad that she needs to talk to Gloria. She's being drugged against her will, and she needs the drugs to wear off in order to get some answers. Even though this is extremely dangerous and her dad warns her against it, ultimately her dad gives in, not only helping Juliet, but also getting Gloria out of medical and to a more secure location, his office. When they do get there, though, Gloria is still in a really, really bad state. Knowing that they don't have a whole lot of time, the doctor does give her something to get her out of this state, and it gets a little dicey, but a short while later, she does come out of it. Juliet right away starts to try to explain to Gloria where she is, who Juliet is, and why Juliet needs to talk to her. Before Gloria can even talk, she gets weirded out because she sees Dr. Nichols show up, and she recognizes him as the guy who wouldn't let her have children. Juliet is shocked by these allegations, but she can't even focus on them because she needs to get the answers from Gloria, so she kicks her dad out of the room. Gloria's mood finally changes when Juliet pulls the book out, and that is something that really jogs Gloria's memory. Gloria explains to Juliet that she gave the book to George's mother, and George's mother was one of us. Juliet doesn't know who us is, and Gloria asks her, "Have you ever heard of the Flame Keepers?" Juliet hasn't, and Gloria says, "Yeah, that's because they erased us. The Silo's been doing it ever since the rebellion. They put something in the water to have our memories fade. They wanted to erase the past and anybody who tried to preserve it. But the Flame Keepers were the people who fought back and kept things, just like this book. I was one of them until they put our flame out. They wanted us to die off so much that they would make us think we had a chance at having a baby, and they would never take our birth control out. They then hear a baby crying, and Gloria asks to hold it, and Juliet agrees. As Gloria's holding this tiny baby, she realizes that she knows Juliet, at least a little bit. She knows her mother. While Juliet's mom wasn't officially a flame keeper, she definitely shared the same curiosity. In fact, George's mom was helping Juliet's mom build a magnifying device, one that would have been highly illegal. Gloria goes on to say, "When I found out what happened to your mom, I really felt like we lost one of our own." It's gotten to the point, though, where Juliet has to take Gloria back to medical. Before she does that, she has an intense conversation with her dad about why her dad would go along with not taking birth control out of people who won the lottery. Her dad pleads ignorance. He tells Juliet that he didn't have a say in it. They lied to him. They told him that by not taking the birth control out, he was helping to prevent genetic disease from running rampant. It was nothing about killing off nonconformists. None of that is good enough for Juliet, so she just escorts Gloria back to medical. When she does that, though, she's seen on judicial's cameras. Now that Sims knows where they are, he wants to know where they came from. As Sims looks into it, Gloria asks Juliet to see the book one more time. After flipping through it, Gloria notices that her flowers are gone. the ones that were in front of the mirror. This jogs a memory of Sheriff Holston coming over to her place. He's the one who brought the flowers and put them in front of the mirror. And that's when Juliet remembers the note that Holston left her about the mirrors. And she realizes that those mirrors probably go two ways. She tells Gloria that she's pretty sure they have a camera behind the mirror. That's why Holston put the flowers there. Juliet knows she needs to get out of there because if this is true, then it's only a matter of time before Judicial shows up. But right before she leaves, she asks Gloria if Holston did anything else. And Gloria says he spent most of the time over there in the vent. When Juliet goes over and pops off the vent, she finds the drive. All of this is being watched by Sims and Judicial. They know they need to move quickly in order to get that drive from Juliet. Juliet turns to go, but Gloria grabs her and says, "You're the last Flamekeeper. You didn't ask for this, but now it's all on you. If this dies with you, then it dies for everybody." Juliet starts shaking her head, but Gloria says, "What would your mother think? I mean, did you ever ask why she killed herself?" And that's probably a question that Juliet's asked over and over again. But Juliet also needs to get the hell out of there, and she does. And when Judicial shows up, Juliet is long gone. In episode 8, Sims arrives at Gloria's bedside just after Juliet escaped. Sims actually has a really good relationship with Gloria, because the only reason Sims has a son is because of Gloria. Him and his wife were having trouble conceiving a child until Gloria stepped in and helped. Because of that, he's willing to give her a little bit of a longer leash. He asks Gloria, what did Juliet Nichols pull out of that vent? And she tells him that it was a bag, one that Sheriff Holston hid there. We don't know how the rest of the conversation went, but you get the idea that Gloria did tell Sims there was a drive in the bag. As for where Juliet is, she went to go hide in her dad's office. She tried using the computer in her dad's office to access the drive, but she was unable to. You need a special computer to do that. The good thing is that office doesn't have secret cameras. So as Sims and the rest of Judicial try their hardest to locate where Juliet is, for the time being, she's incognito. She ends up falling asleep in the office and only waking up when she hears the radio go off and her name being called. It's Paul who tells her that she needs to come to the office ASAP, and once she gets there, it's Judicial tearing the office apart, looking for the drive. Billings is pissed. He feels like that when Juliet went to go visit Meadows, she must have done something that led Meadows to ordering this search. But he's also pissed at Judicial, because this search is a blatant violation of the pact. Law enforcement premises can't be searched without extreme probable cause, and he feels like they don't have it. They completely ignore Paul's request to stop, continuing to search, but their search is coming up empty. They even go as far as to search Juliet's bag that's on her, but that doesn't have the drive in it either. She stashed it somewhere. Once Judicial finally leaves, pretty empty-handed, mind you, Paul and Juliet head into Juliet's office, and they both think the same thing. This doesn't feel random, it feels more personal. Juliet tells Paul that even though the warrant says Meadows, she didn't do this. When she was talking to Meadows privately, she could tell that Meadows wasn't the one calling the shots. And the person that she believes is calling the shots is Sims. All of it makes a lot of sense. Sims has never liked her and has been wanting to get rid of her since she arrived. Paul isn't so sure, but Juliet is very confident. There's a little bit of a lull in the conversation, and then Juliet remembers something that Paul said, that whole seizure was illegal. And Paul says, yeah, absolutely it was. They skipped about 10 steps. So Juliet gets a wild idea to go and arrest Sims. She storms into his office, interrupting a conversation with one of the agents who actually searched them. Sims was in the middle of yelling at him for not coming up with the drive. Neither Paul or Juliet hear that part of the conversation, though, because they were storming in. But Juliet tells Paul to take Sims into custody. And Paul, knowing the pact like the back of his hand, starts reciting exactly the law that Sims broke. Sims feels like this is a joke. It's only a matter of time before he's out. He doesn't really take it all that serious, but he is a little surprised that Paul would do something like this. They did work together for a long, long time. But Paul isn't loyal to his friends. Paul is loyal to the pact. Billings takes Sims away, and that leaves Sims' office all to Juliet. Juliet starts looking through some filing cabinets of Sims, and then she finds a secret compartment with a couple of files. And one of those files was her mother's. The file goes into the magnifying device that her mother built, the one that Judicial found and ultimately destroyed. It's something that Juliet's dad did not want her mom to build. So after reading the file, Juliet headed to go visit her dad and ask, why didn't you want my mom to build that magnifying device? He kind of dismisses it because Juliet's had strong feelings in the past, but Juliet says, no, this time I want to know why she killed herself. I wasn't willing to listen before, but I am now. He goes on to tell her that after they lost Juliet's brother, he kind of went inward. He devoted his life to his career, which wasn't the smart thing, while Juliet's mother pushed out. She wanted to get answers. She wanted to help people and make sure that what happened to them never happened to any other family. She didn't care about rules. That's why she made the magnifying device. And then one day, Judicial came in and destroyed it. Juliet's father has a lot of regrets in this situation. He regrets not doing something, not pushing back on Judicial, because ultimately it led to Juliet's mom being in a dark, dark place. After that moment, she was never the same again. Juliet mentions how her mother thought he had reported her, and honestly, Juliet did too. But after reading her mother's file, Juliet knows that Judicial was watching her mother with sensors through mirrors. Juliet apologizes to her dad for believing that he was the one who turned her mother in, gives him a hug, but then they get interrupted by one of the nurses who tells the doctor that maintenance is there to check something with the vents. And he didn't put in a maintenance request. Once the nurse leaves after they tell the guy to come back, Juliet says that maintenance guy is here to put one of those listening devices in here because this is a dead spot for them. So they're going to put a camera, they're going to put a listening device, they're going to put something that monitors what goes on in this room. She then goes and retrieves the hard drive that she stashed there earlier because she needs to find out exactly what's on it. Right before she leaves, she tells her dad, "Can you let Martha know that I'm coming down there? I should be there by 6 p.m. Juliet, however, doesn't make it by 6, and by 7, Martha gets really, really concerned. But Juliet just got held up on the steps. Judicial has put in checkpoints, making sure that people with relics don't get anywhere. That forces Juliet into hiding a bit. She's not quite sure what she's going to do, so she sends a note to Lucas asking him if he can stop by. With Lucas working in IT, Juliet figured that he might be able to help with freeing up the drive. After hearing the kind of restrictions that are on this drive in order to access it, Lucas tells her that she needs to take it to her work computer. The problem is she can't go there. And she asks Lucas if there's any way he can work around it, but he's hesitant to do that. And she begs him, saying, please, I think this drive has the answers to a lot of questions, like why Marnes and the mayor and George were killed. And that comes as news to him because Marnes and the mayor being killed, that wasn't in the papers. The story that they were told was they just died of natural causes. Lucas, though, is still hesitant to help her, and she says, come on, you should be the one who wants to help me. You sit in the cafeteria every night looking and wondering what's out there. What if the answers to your questions are on this drive? He still doesn't want to help, and he starts talking about rules. And that's when Juliet bashes her mirror, exposing the hidden camera that was there, the one that Judicial watches her on. Just like Juliet's dad, Lucas had no idea that these cameras even existed. It's a real shocking moment for him. But even though it's shocking, it still doesn't work. Lucas doesn't want to risk getting in trouble because he's the only one taking care of his mother at the moment. And at that point, Juliet can't sit there and argue with him anymore. After smashing the mirror, she knows it's only a matter of time before Judicial shows up looking for her. So she gets out of there. And that ends up being a pretty smart call because a short while later, Judicial does show up at her doorstep, but she's nowhere to be found. Juliet heads down the silo, quickly trying to get to Martha, but she's stopped. She tries pulling the "I'm the sheriff, let me through," but that still doesn't work. That is until Bernard backs her up on it and commands Judicial Security to step down. Bernard came looking for her because she arrested Sims. He wants to know why. And she says, you were right. Judicial is planning a takeover, but Meadows is not the one behind it. It's Sims. He doesn't want to have this conversation in public, so they head to a cornfield. When they get in the middle of it, Juliet backs up her previous statement that Sims is actually the one calling the shots. Bernard kind of shakes his head and then asks Juliet, what are they searching for? I mean, they tore your apartment up. Now there's checkpoints. What do you have that's so threatening? Juliet just plays dumb, saying, I have no idea what you're talking about. And Bernard says, come on, Juliet, the clock is ticking. So if you have the hard drive, then... But he catches himself. He realizes that he just showed his hand. He accidentally said hard drive. He wasn't supposed to do that. And now Juliet is super suspicious of how Bernard knows that she had a hard drive. Juliet turns to run, but she runs right into Sims. It's at this moment that Juliet realizes it was actually Bernard who was the one calling the shots, and it was Bernard who had Marnes and the previous mayor killed. Juliet is in shock, and then she hears Bernard say, I'm sorry, Sheriff Nichols, did you say you want to go outside? I heard that, right? And Sims backs him up on this false claim. Juliet is even more surprised and asks him, why would you do this? And Bernard says, because the needs of many outweigh the lives of a few, and that hard drive threatens the lives of everyone in the silo. And you are the greatest threat to the silo in 140 years. Judicial police then show up and Juliet takes off running, but a short while later she's caught and captured. As the police, which by the way includes Billings, escort Juliet back upstairs, Juliet pleads her case to Paul. But it's hard to plead the case when Sims and Bernard are sitting there saying, no, she definitely said she wants to go outside. Juliet gets a break, though, when Paul, who is the one escorting her, his hands start shaking. Juliet knocks into him, grabs the bag from Sims that contains the hard drive, and then jumps over the edge of the silo. In episode 9, Juliet doesn't fall all the way down to the down deep. She actually just falls one story down. But it still hurts. Luckily, though, she is able to escape. Because of how it all went down, though, Sims thinks that Paul might have let her get away, even though that's not actually the case. Because she was able to escape, Bernard is freaking out a little bit. He wants to find her immediately. And Sims is already on it. He's searching every apartment, but she's not popping up. In order to make sure that they do find Juliet, they're going to be talking to everybody. Juliet's family, her friends. Sims goes and talks to Juliet's father, but he doesn't know. And he basically tells Sims that even if he did know, he wouldn't help him. A couple of other people from Judicial head down to the down deep and talk to Martha, but she doesn't know either, and she claims she's got nothing to hide. And news of Juliet proclaiming that she wanted to go outside has reached the down deep. Martha certainly doesn't believe it. So far, Judicial's coming up empty. So, where is Juliet? Well, Sims maybe should have went home, because Juliet has broken into his house. And when his wife and son show up for the day, she's hiding inside. Sims thought this might be the case, so he did send some people from Judicial to look after his family, but Sims' wife told them to go away. She immediately, though, regretted that decision when she walked in and noticed that somebody had been inside. In order to protect her son, she locked him away in a room as she slowly made her way through the apartment with a gun looking for the intruder. Juliet was still able to get the jump on her. Juliet then escorted her over to a pole and handcuffed her to it. Sims' son was in another room the entire time, but he could see what was going on from a crack. Juliet, though, didn't want to hurt Sims' wife. All she wanted was to use Sims' computer, because she knew she couldn't use her own computer to access the drive, but Sims would absolutely have that capability. He would have permission. So she hooks up the drive and she waits for it to load up. While Juliet was trying to load up the drive, the new sheriff, Billings, went to Juliet's apartment, where Judicial police were already raiding it and trying to look for any signs of where she might have went. When Billings shows up, they don't want to allow him inside, at Sims' orders, even though Paul has a right to do so through the pact. Paul's relationship, though, with Judicial ends up benefiting him, because he kind of knows the girl that's stopping him, and she whispers to him that there was really nothing left. The place was a complete mess. Paul leaves Juliet's apartment, but he is planning on returning once Judicial is gone. At this point, Judicial does have one lead. They found out that Juliet sent a message to somebody in the cafeteria, and they know that that person was Lucas. Bernard sits Lucas down and tells him exactly what he knows happened. That Lucas went to Juliet's apartment, she showed him the broken mirror, she showed him what was behind it, and most importantly, she showed him the hard drive. He threatens Lucas with all the things that Lucas didn't do, i.e. informing Judicial about what she had. And it's pretty serious. He's threatening to send him outside. The issue is Lucas doesn't know anything. The only thing he knows is that on the drive there was the number 18 written on it. Coincidentally, Bernard has a little keychain with the number 18 on it that at times blinks, buzzes, and flashes red. That number, though, is big. It actually does give Bernard a lead. He's able to go into Judicial security and tell them to look for the hard drive with the number 18 on it. so they start looking. While Bernard and Judicial are trying to find the hard drive, Paul Billings has made his way back into Juliet's apartment, and he's able to snoop around. The first thing you notice is a little piece of the broken mirror, the two-way mirror. But then he's able to locate the book, and it shocks him. He flips through it, seeing pictures and colors he never saw before, but he realizes he needs to destroy it. He tears one piece of the book out and then puts the rest of it in the oven, turning it on and letting the oven do the work. He heads back to the office, and then he just stares at it. That office obviously used to belong to Juliet, who finally, after a short while, has opened up the drive and starts flipping through it. The first thing she finds is a file that says "Start Here," and when she opens it, she's shocked because it's a video file of George. And that is something that they didn't even know could happen. They didn't know that anyone in the silo had the capability to record themselves and put it on a drive like this. Juliet is mesmerized by it, and so is Sims's wife, who was able to escape at this point. She is so shocked by it that she stops trying to attack Juliet, arrest her, and all that. Because they both are kind of just listening to George say that what is on that drive is, quote, the truth. At this point, Sim's wife has a hammer, and she also has the gun. She could attack Juliet. But instead of doing any of that, Sim's wife tips off Juliet, saying the second you connect to that drive, they know where you are. So you can either run with it, or you can continue to watch this, and they're going to catch you. And Sims's wife is correct. As soon as Juliet plugged in the drive, Judicial was able to locate Drive 18. And when they said the floor, Sims knew right away where Juliet was. So he headed straight for his apartment. When he arrived, though, with a bunch of security, Juliet was nowhere to be found. When Sims gets his wife alone, she does admit to him that she let Juliet go. She was a former raider. She knows that former raiders don't always abide by the rules. She wasn't about to let a firefight break out in her apartment with their son in another room. Now Sims and Bernard are back to looking for Juliet. Juliet, not having many allies, decided to go to one close by, Patrick. She promised him the watch that George gave her in return for his help. George knew a really good IT guy that he thought could help with this situation. When the IT guy arrives, he's a little freaked out because it is the former sheriff, but then they explain to him that she needs a computer with a certain type of access, and a hacker like him would know how to do that. And he does. Not only is he able to open up the drive, he's able to bounce the signal to another floor. That way, Judicial thinks that he's on floor 135 when he's actually on floor 60, let's say. Juliet picks up right where she left off, and it's that message from George. It gets a little personal, so Patrick and this IT wizard kind of let Juliet sit there and watch it. And George tells her once again that the drive is full of the truth, but also that, yes, he was planning on just using her. And then this crazy thing happened, he fell in love. He then goes on to say that he found that door that he had been looking for, and it's huge. He couldn't get through it. He figures maybe Juliet can. And as far as the water, he simply says it was nothing to worry about. Right before the video ends, he tells Juliet to look for the file that says Jane Carmody cleaning. That is the whole reason why Allison and the sheriff went out to clean. He wraps up the video by telling her that he loves her, and then the video ends. She starts to wipe away tears, but then she remembers what George said about that Jane Carmody file. She opens it up, and she is shocked at what she sees. It's green grass, it's blue sky, it's trees, it's stuff she's never seen before. She calls over Patrick and this IT hacker, and they also are shocked, because the three of them know that this development is huge. And in the season finale, as soon as it kind of settles in about what they're watching, Juliet jumps into action, saying everybody needs to see this. The issue is, all of the TVs and monitors are controlled by IT. Now, this hacker tells Juliet that they can get into them. They can hack in, but that's going to take traveling through 30 levels. Neither Patrick or the hacker really want to help Juliet out, but they also know that they need to get the hell out of the apartment because Judicial is coming. And the way that Juliet is going to travel through the silo isn't through the steps. They're going to have checkpoints and people looking for her. The way that she does it is through the recycling chute. They have to dodge some items, but it works. They're able to get to the lower level without being detected. While Juliet was making her way down to the lower level, Bernard and Sims are just staring at a bunch of monitors, hoping that she shows up on them. And that's when Sims gets a note that Paul Billings had gone to Juliet's apartment. And that was something that Sims told Paul not to do. So he leaves the monitor room to go find Paul, and he scolds him for not obeying the order, but then he asks him, "Did you find any hints about where she might have went?" And Paul says, "No, I didn't." Sims then gets really agitated. The more he's speaking, the more his tone goes up, because he wants revenge for what Juliet did, sneaking in his apartment and kind of terrorizing his wife and son. At least that's the way he sees it. There might be no one in the silo looking for Juliet more than Sims. Sims calms down a little bit, and he reveals to Paul that he knows Paul has the syndrome, which has been worrying Paul this entire time, the fact that someone would know who could actually do something. And Sims is that person, but what Sims tells Paul is that he's willing to grant him an exemption. That's a big relief to Paul. When Sims gets back to Bernard and the monitor room, they know where Juliet is. She's popped up on the screen, and they can see that the hacker and Patrick are there, and the hacker is trying to do something with the IT computers. But then they all see what the hacker was doing, because the picture of the tree and the green grass and the blue sky, it all pops up on the monitors, and Bernard freaks out. He tells everybody to cover their eyes, look away, and that includes Sims. He then frantically goes into IT mode to get that picture off of all the TVs. It was only up there for maybe a minute, but everybody who saw it was pretty damn surprised. When the signal gets shut down, that's when Juliet, Patrick, and the hacker go their separate ways. They know it's only a matter of time before Judicial finds them at this point. The problem is, Judicial can't find her because she's using the recycling chute. And both Bernard and Sims can't figure out how Juliet keeps escaping them, especially with the security that they have. And that is when it dawns on Bernard that she must be in the recycling chute. That's the only place where they don't have cameras. It makes the most sense. Sims radios to the sheriff's department to go take a look, and sure enough, Juliet is there. And Judicial has ordered the sheriff's unit to knock her out of the chute. At first, they just throw simple items down. Items that would hurt you, no doubt, but you probably wouldn't die from. But that's when they make sure that they're going to knock her out, by pushing this giant metal unit that if it hits Juliet, she is done for. Juliet is even scared of this thing. She's shocked when she sees it being pushed over the edge. So in an attempt to save her life, she decides to drop, falling all the way down to the down deep, landing on a bunch of recycling. But luckily for her, when she landed, the people in the recycling room jumped to action, grabbing her and narrowly saving her life before that giant item landed right on top of her. Juliet's injured, she's knocked out, but she is amongst her people. People like Martha and Shirley, they're there to make sure that she's going to be okay, and they're ready to defend her if Judicial comes. But they're pretty surprised when Knox shows up and reveals that he tipped off Judicial that Juliet's down there. Initially, they're pretty pissed off at him, but he explains that it's for the best. Juliet being down there put the entire Down Deep at risk. And even Juliet says he's right. It is for the best. Juliet asks Knox for a minute so that she can tell Martha some of the things that she's discovered, but they don't get that, because when Sims shows up, along with Bernard and a couple of Judicial police, they jump right into action. They're not willing to give Juliet any extra time, especially Sims, who wants to kill her. Juliet and Sims both get into a shouting match because Sims feels like his family was traumatized, and Juliet reminds him that he does that every day to families. That's literally his job. All Bernard cares about, though, is finding the drive, and he does that in Juliet's bag. First thing he does is smash it to pieces. The way Bernard sees it is that if Juliet did what she wanted to, she would have put everybody in the silo in danger. Juliet says people can handle the truth, but Bernard doesn't see it like that. He then makes Juliet an offer. She waives her right to a hearing, and she stopped claiming that she didn't want to go outside, and in return, nobody in the Down Deep will pay the price for harboring a fugitive. It's too good of an offer for Juliet to pass up. She doesn't want to put her friends at risk, so she agrees. Bernard, Sims, and the rest of Judicial then parade Juliet up the steps of the silo, and everybody can see. Two people, though, that have no interest in watching this are Martha and Shirley. Shirley is still pissed off at what Knox did. She also feels like she should have talked Juliet out of going after that Heat tape when theirs ran out, because she feels like going after that Heat tape is what pissed Bernard off. That thing, though, about the Heat tape, it sticks with Martha. She does something she hasn't done in about 25 years. She steps foot out of her apartment because she has to go pay somebody a visit. It's a woman named Carla, and she works in supply. Supply is in charge of that Heat tape. And the more that Martha thought about it, the more it didn't make sense, because the Heat tape that they have down in mechanical is way better than the Heat tape they have up in supply. So why in the world would Bernard even care about stealing a box of the crappy Heat tape? So what Martha asked Carla to do is switch out the Heat tape. Put the Heat tape from mechanical, the better Heat tape, in the box that is going to be used to make the suit that Juliet's going to wear when she steps outside. That way, Juliet's not wearing that suit that's made of the crappy Heat tape. Martha has no idea if this will work or not, but hey, it's worth a shot, and it's her way of trying to help her friend out. As Martha was trying to intervene, Juliet was getting the shock of her lifetime. Bernard and Sims escort her to the monitor room. It's in the janitor's closet. It's hidden. You press a button, there's a secret door. You go down, and sure enough, there is all the judicial monitors. The reason that Bernard brought her there wasn't just to show her this, but also because he wanted her to see what happened to George. It turns out no one killed George. Doug Trumbull was taking George in, and he realized that he would probably be tortured. So he decided to jump on his own. He knew what he was doing. It's really, really tough for Juliet to watch it, but there's the proof she needs, and she finally gets her answer. She then has to go and get fitted for a suit. While she waits to go outside, she gets some visitors. The first one's her dad. She apologizes to her dad for how she's treated him for all these years. But he doesn't care about that. He just wants to know why she wants to go outside. She doesn't really answer the question, though. She wants to tell him, but she can't. The next person to come visit Juliet is Shirley, although her visit has an ulterior motive. She brings Juliet some food from the Down Deep, but in that food is hidden a secret message. There's a note from Martha that says, "You wanted the truth. The truth is I love you. Have no fear. They're good in supply." Juliet has no idea what that means, but she just kind of files it away and waits. She has to wait for Bernard, who, before he's going to give Juliet that whole spiel about wanting to go outside, he has to visit with Lucas. He appreciates Lucas's information, but it doesn't mean Lucas isn't being punished. He's not going to have to go out and clean, but he is going to go to the mines for 10 years. When he wraps up his meeting with a very shocked Lucas, he heads down to the prison to have a one-on-one conversation with Juliet before they do the whole ceremony. He tells her, "You once asked me when your trouble started, and I know you think it's when you stole the tape, but no, your trouble started at conception. Your parents were never supposed to have kids, but accidents happen. Surprisingly, though, you became useful to the silo, but then you became sheriff, you started looking into the death of George Wilkins, and you became a mortal threat to the silo." She starts shaking her head and says if that means that this led to the death of Marnes, the mayor, the former sheriff, his wife, if it led to the death of all of them, then I don't want to be a part of the silo anymore. He explains that adjustments have to be made, and when Allison and George open up that file, he had to adjust, because opening up that file and really opening up the hard drive as a whole put everybody in danger. Juliet right away asks if her mother was one of those adjustments, but he says no, that was her choice. She yells at him, "You know the display is fake. I mean, why not tell people the truth? I mean, you have that massive door that George found in the silo, deep down. Why don't you tell the people about that?" By the look on his face, though, it seems like there's a chance Bernard had no idea about that door. But instead of acknowledging it, he just says, "The founders left us with many mysteries." He then tells Juliet it's time to get dressed. She does have one request. She wants to take the sheriff badge that used to belong to Holston. She wants to take it with her and go outside. And Bernard grants the request. They get her dressed, and everybody waits to see if Juliet Nichols will go outside and clean. The group in the Down Deep especially is invested in this one. But what they never expected was that Martha would show up to watch. I mean, the seas part. She has a lot of respect down there. A little while later, they see Juliet on their screen, and when Juliet steps outside, she sees exactly what Holston saw, what Allison saw, a tree, green grass, blue sky, the works. She walks over to the camera, but unlike them, She doesn't clean. She pulls the rag out and then she drops it, which is something that no one has ever done before. It's shocking. Bernard and Sims aren't really worried about it. They both say to themselves it's only a matter of time before she drops dead. So they're just watching Juliet walk up the same hill that Allison and Holston walked up. And then Juliet trips. Both Bernard and Sims think that this is the moment where she dies, just like Allison and the sheriff. But Juliet starts feeling around on the ground. She can't see anything, but she feels something. And then she puts her hand down and she notices that her hand is going through an image of a rock. All of it's fake because she can feel somebody's body. She casually takes out the sheriff's badge and places it down on that body, thinking that it's Holston. Everybody's watching in surprise, but Bernard just says she knows. And then he makes a beeline for the IT computers. As he runs off, Juliet does the unthinkable. She stands back up. She starts making her way up the hill, which no one's ever done before. They've never made it this far. Luckily for Juliet, the good heat tape is working. It's keeping her safe. At the point that she reaches the top of the hill, Bernard has made his way to the servers. He used that special 18 key to get in, and while we don't know if he had a hand in it, all of a sudden the display on Juliet's face mask completely changes. It goes from this picturesque scene to the drab and dilapidated visual that everybody in the silo has. When she turns around, it's just a desolate wasteland. When she looks in front of her, it's the same. But she keeps on walking. What she might not realize at the time, though, is that silo is one of probably about 100 silos. And in the way distance, looks like a city. And that is the end of Season 1 of Silo. Thank you so much for getting this part of the recap. I do appreciate it. Consider subscribing to the channel. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought it sucked. I have merch, so go buy a t-shirt or something. I have a new baby, so I got diapers to buy. Go buy a mug. That'd be cool. I have a Patreon. Whatever. I have plenty of ways you can give me money. Also, make sure to share this, because if you needed it, somebody else probably needs it. Sharing is caring. And give me your theories for Season 2. Write them in the comments. And finally, be nice in the comments. If I mess something up, just keep it moving. It happens. But once again, thank you so much for watching.